All right, the time is 2 p.m. and I will call the Thursday, July 4th, 2023 regular council meeting to order. And I'll begin with a land acknowledgement that the city of Fort Saskatchewan is located within Treaty 6 territory in Métis Nation of Alberta Region 4, the ancestral and traditional territory of the Nihilwak, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, Nakota Sioux, and Métis. We acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for generations. It is because of our treaty relationship that we can live, work, and play on Treaty 6 territory. So the first item that we have is a motion for the consent agenda, which includes the minutes of June 27th and Capital Region Northeast Water Services Commission status. And we can take a motion, but if anybody at any point in time wants these severed to have them taken out, you can also request that as well. Councillor Nguyen?
Yeah, I'll move that council approve the minutes of June 27, 2023 regular council meeting under the consent agenda, as well as item 8.1, Capital Region Northeast Water Services Commission status update.
Okay, thank you. So I'm not seeing anybody weighing in that they wish to have either of these severed. So I will close the motion. Please cast your vote. That is carried unanimously. And we do have to have a very minor in-camera session before we can deal with something coming further on the agenda. So I would take a motion to go in camera for the IAFF Local 5277 negotiations. Councillor Macon?
I'll make the motion that we move in camera for items related to FOIP.
Thank you. I will close the motion. Please cast your vote. And that is carried unanimously. So for everybody who's sitting in the audience, we will be adjourning. I'm not sure. It shouldn't take hopefully more than 10 or 15 minutes. So we will return as promptly as we can, sooner if we can. So we'll adjourn up into the committee room. Yes. Okay, we will resume the meeting. Motion was put forward to return to open, and there is business arising from the in-camera session, so I believe there's a motion that you can put on for us. And okay, so I will ask council if somebody would like to put that motion on. Councillor Kelly.
Certainly. I move the council approve the compensation adjustment put forward in the confidential closed session report presented to council July 4, 23 for the collective agreement between the City of Fort Saskatchewan and IAFF Local 5277 for the period October 15, 2020 to December 31, 24.
Okay, thank you. And because that was discussed in camera, I'm not gonna, unless anybody has something they really want to speak to, not open it up for a bunch of discussion and debate. So with that, I will close it, and please cast your vote.
Your Worship, we're just waiting for Councillor Harris.
I think. Okay, thank you. Okay, that's carried unanimously. Thank you. The minutes were approved under consent. This is the opportunity for delegations. If anybody would like to come and speak to any of the items that are on the agenda, you would have 5 minutes to come and speak to any of those items. And we do have some presentations. Okay. So I'll move on from there. So the first presentation that we have is Dow Canada Path to Zero. So I'll invite Michael Liu, Marcella, and Don. Are you coming up too? You're all welcome to come up. There's 4 seats up here. There's actually 5 seats. So if y'all want to come, that's fine. There's only 3 mics though, so you're going to have to share. All right, so thank you very much for joining us here today, and we look forward to this presentation. And it's been an exciting time with your public open houses. So we do have 30 minutes set up for this.
We'll try to be efficient.
Just push your button.
We'll try. Okay, yeah. Thank you for letting us come to council. Really appreciate it. I think I know most of you. I'm Don Cameron. I'm the site director for Alberta operations, and we did want to take the opportunity to come in front of the council here. And certainly this is, we consider the City of Fort Saskatchewan one of our, if not most important, key partners. So we felt like it was really important to come give you an update of where we are, what's going on, and what's happening here. So I have with us, I think as Marcella Zhang, Michael Liu, and Ryan Wayland. These are all part of the team that's working, of course, on this. Let me move quickly because we'll get to the meat of it. This is the standard slide that I show, but again, we're making forward-looking statements, right? We are not. These are all expectations. These are not things that investment decisions should be made upon. What we want to cover today, I'll briefly cover a couple of high points of where we've been for the first 6 months of the year. We do want to talk a little bit about the Path to Zero update, the project we've been developing, and that'll be the majority of the presentation, along with some progress we've made with our Indigenous inclusion policy, and finally our community and the citizenship. So that's what we wanted to cover today, if possible. So just a couple of brief comments though to start before I turn it over to the team here. And we do have a goal to be the safest and most reliable, sustainable site in the Dow fleet. We do compare ourselves and work with sites all over the world, right? So we want to be driven by by our inclusive talent and make a difference. So I think most of you know we've been here for 62 years, and this has been a really remarkable 6 months so far. Certainly, we have made some major progress in our commitment to environmental health and safety. We've had what's in the Dow world is called 000 performance for the first 6 months of the year, which means we've had no injuries, no significant spills, and no compliance events, which would have required any sort of significant notification to the government. So we're one of the few Dow sites actually that is in that position here halfway through the year. So we're pretty focused on trying to maintain that. Additionally, I think if you were at our open house, we talked about the fact that, you know, we had our lowest flaring year in over 10 years here. We know that's something that the community sees, and we think it's very important to not flare whenever possible, in addition to the fact that we're putting chemicals that could be put to more economical purpose. And then, of course, there's lots of excitement about Path to Zero. If you came to our open house, and we're going to talk in a little more detail about that, but we continue to have increasing interest from many stakeholders, both companies that are interested in participating, government stakeholders at both the provincial and federal level. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So again, pretty exciting time for us all here right now and for the city. And I think with that, it's probably, we would like to move into the Path to Zero update. I think Ryan takes this.
Hi, you can hear me? Okay.
Yep.
Ryan Wayland, I'm our site integration leader. I've been working on the Path to Zero project for the better part of 4 or 5 years. So just an update on Path to Zero. A couple of key announcements have been made. So Fluor has been awarded a significant part of our EPC work. So sorry, engineering, procurement, construction, and is part of our movement to the next stages of design. So we're working with Fluor based in Calgary. They have an Edmonton office as well, and they've also got one near our Houston site. So it's quite very aligned with our manufacturing sites. Linde has been named our industrial gas partner. So they will be building assets as part of our Path to Zero project located on our site, but for our use. So they're going to build our hydrogen plants and industrial gas facilities. More internal, where we have an active people team that's working on staffing, recruitment, how to pull people to the area, that type of thing. On our site, we're working on that, reaching out to various schools. Nate and U of A are great schools, but we know we're going to need to do our part to bring people to the area. Nate tradespeople, operations technicians, and engineers are kind of the three main buckets of people we plan to bring to our site. So we are doing some early site preparation work, so I call it moving a little bit of dirt around. That's kind of happening as we speak, basically, digging some holes in the ground to make sure underground lines are where our drawings say they are, so that we can go and further design packages. And our final investment decision is coming up here by the end of the year. So we anticipated that's a question, so thought we'd answer it up front. And then Marcella's got a couple slides on kind of the regulatory framework. And yeah, okay.
Thanks, Ryan. You guys can hear me okay? Y'all can hear me?
Just pull it up a bit. Yeah.
Okay. So also in June, we hosted Dow's board of directors and leadership team for a site visit, and we had lots of meetings with government officials, including Mayor Katcher. It was the first time that the board of directors had ever been to Alberta in most cases, so they were very impressed with the area, with the Dow personnel, with the folks that they met. And we were able to have meetings with the Premier and her cabinet, as well as Minister Champagne and business leaders and Indigenous leaders. So it was a very, very good visit. In March, we welcomed the U.S. Ambassador to Canada to our site. So there's a picture of him up there. And Minister Champagne also visited Dow's headquarters in March. So we've had a lot of interactions with various levels of government, which we appreciate. Thanks, Don. So Dow's currently working with relevant government agencies to ensure that all the regulatory requirements are met for Path to Zero, and I'm leading the permitting activities, so appreciate all the help that we've gotten from the city so far. Last week, we hosted a public open house to talk about our AUC regulated assets that we're going to be adding. So a steam turbine and some transmission lines. And we do appreciate the presence of City Council at that event. It helps us a lot. We're going to be designing, building, operating all of our new facilities in accordance with Alberta legislation, AUC legislation, all the right rules for electrical generation. You can go to the next slide. So we're continuing, we wanted to highlight our partnership with the municipality, with the City of Fort Saskatchewan. We're continuing to work very collaboratively with city staff. One of our objectives is to ensure that we maintain our good neighbor status in the community, and hopefully we can continue that and improve that relationship. The city staff has been very helpful and responsive to our many questions, so we do very much appreciate that. I wanted to let you know that we're in the process of doing a traffic study to look at the traffic during construction as well as long-term for site operations. We're working on some parallel paths on some pending purchased land within the city limits, some short-term parking, long-term rezoning, potentially of some land from industrial reserve to medium industrial. And we do really appreciate the progress that's been made on some drainage issues coming from off-site to our site. We are, as Ryan said, doing some early site planning, moving dirt, and that we required some help from the city to make sure we got our stripping and grading permit. And we did in a very timely manner. Again, much appreciated. We do look forward to continuing to work with the city, maybe on future zoning, bylaw changes perhaps, infrastructure issues, and a development permit for the ahead of the construction of our new facility that we'll be applying for probably around the time we get FID. Michael. Oh no, Ryan. Ryan's going to do the inclusion policy.
Yeah, so just on our Indigenous inclusion policy, it's important to us, as I know the city, thank you for the land acknowledgement. We've really been ramping up efforts here in the last couple of years, because as much as I think we like to think we're a great neighbor, we seem to get feedback we're a pretty good neighbor. We haven't always seen our Indigenous communities as maybe the neighbor like we have the city. So we've focused on working with the 4 nations that you see there that are closest to us. So Alexis, Nakota Sioux, Paul Band, which are west of the city, and then Alexander, kind of outside Morinville, and Enoch on the southwest edge of the city. So we've been focusing on engaging with each of the chiefs and the council as appropriate, and some of their business sectors to pull them into our project in various ways as well. In particular, on our Indigenous inclusion policy, we celebrated National Indigenous Peoples Day on June 21st by rolling this policy out to our employees, and it really focuses on the 4 pillars that you see there, but cultural awareness and respect. We've done a lot to educate our folks, to be more aware and sensitive. Community engagement, we've Dawn and I actually were able to attend an event run by Alexander First Nation Thursday last week, and we've done various things with the various nations. And then workforce and business development, that's probably been the largest pillar that we've been working on even prior to the policy kind of coming to fruition here recently. But working to get more Indigenous people into some of the trades and occupations that we'll eventually hire, as well as several of these nations have business ventures, profitable standalone business ventures, and we're doing our part to engage them and make sure they have a chance through our bidding process, which they might be otherwise excluded. And then community benefits, so where it makes sense, we're supporting various activities. We've done the Indian relay races with Enoch last year. That'll come again here in September on the long weekend, and we've done some golf tournament sponsorships and things like that as well. So, and then Michael for the last slide.
So thank you, Ryan. And this year, Dow has been very fortunate to take part in many meaningful community initiatives. So I'll highlight a couple of them here that have been our priorities here in Fort Saskatchewan. So one of the things that we continue to do is to be involved in the Pulling Our Weight campaign to reduce waste in our communities. So in May, we partnered with the city and the chamber to do the downtown cleanup in our downtown core, removing over 1,000 pounds of waste from Fort Saskatchewan so far this year through our employee volunteers. And that makes it the 115th cleanup that we have done since 2021 when this campaign started. Another thing we are doing is working with partners to develop skills, especially in skilled trades, because we know that there's going to be a skills trades shortage in Alberta. One of the groups that we have, a new group that we have partnered with is Skills Alberta, which provides career and training for young people. And so 3 of the initiatives that took place in Fort Saskatchewan and Edmonton include the Skills Alberta Heartland Skills in the Heartland event last fall, a Try a Trades event for our local high schools, the Provincial Skills Alberta competition, and the Girls in Trades and Technology conference, which engaged thousands of students through that partnership. Another partnership we're very proud of is our work with Families First, and we were very lucky to be able to volunteer for the Healing Homes project, so the first second stage housing for victims of domestic violence, thanks to the work of Families First. And all of this, of course, would not be possible with our employee volunteers who are very dedicated. And this year they've volunteered more than 1,800 hours so far. The latest being the pancake breakfast at Canada Day this weekend. So with Path to Zero on the horizon, we look forward to expanding on our existing partnerships as well as forming new ones, rolling up our sleeves and helping our communities decarbonize and grow together. So I'd like to thank Council and Mayor as well as Aaron from Economic Development for arranging this presentation. I'll hand it back over to Don if you want to wrap it up.
Yeah, just final word. I think we've definitely had a lot of activity. This is, I would say this presentation, I hope that what the council is seeing is a consistent progress since the last time that we spoke. There's nothing hidden in here that's really significantly different. I would say we've progressed as we were communicating to you last time, and we feel good about where we're going. So at this point, I think we just want to thank you, and if you have any questions, we'd be glad to take a few of them.
Great, thank you. Well, I will open it up to questions. I'm just going to say thank you very much for coming out and presenting today. And yes, as part of the Indigenous, Dow also provided the funding for the 3 flagpoles that were put up out there as well. And I know I did thank Dow that day, but most of you weren't there, but you had other representation there. So we do thank you for all you do in our community, and the pancake breakfast was awesome. Thousands of people. I think there was thousands, not just hundreds, but thousands. So I will open it up for questions. Councillor Macon.
This is just going to be the easiest question. I apologize. I know Dawn and Ryan and Michael, but I didn't catch your name, and I was just wondering what it was.
Marcella.
Sure, it's Marcella de Jong.
Okay.
Yeah, I do environmental regulatory work for Dow.
Okay.
And I'm leading environmental permitting.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And I could go on the same as Mayor Ketcher. Thank you for all that you do.
Great, thank you. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, and nice to see you folks here again. Mr. Cameron, I acknowledge your introductory comments on the forward-looking statements, and I understand completely that you're required to use extreme discretion, but I'm hoping that you could perhaps see fit to offer some color in the progress of the discussions within Dow and how you think it sits going forward. And only say, of course, what you're comfortable to speak to.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks for providing me some air cover on that, Councillor Kelly. But and certainly we do have to be careful. I think, the readiness to make the final investment decision by the board is one that's taking a lot of paths. I mean, certainly there is a very technical path, right? How much does it cost to build the assets, the engineering design work, and that is progressing. That's a major leg that's moving, that has to be completed. So we have those cost estimates. There's obviously the regulatory leg where we want to work with the government to be very certain about our relationships with the provincial, local, and national government. And then there's the site readiness, right? So we've been working on all three of those legs. And I think they've all progressed as expected to move us towards a second half of this year decision. And I think there's a lot of optimism. The things that we thought we would accomplish have been occurring. We're not all the way there yet, but I think we have the hill in front of us, but we're not seeing walls, if I could say that. So, we're not there yet. We are progressing as expected. And I'm personally optimistic, but hopefully over the next 2 to 3 months, I think the next time we come speak to you, we'll have one way or another, we'll have a even more firm direction. So I'm not giving you I know I'm being a little wishy-washy there, but that's probably the best I can do.
And I appreciate your response. Thank you for the comments. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Councillor Batoye, questions?
Thank you so much for your presentation. It's so good to see all of you again. My question is, I'm just going to ask my question to Don, because this is just based on the conversation we had at the open house. And something you had said was that even if this project didn't go on as is, there's a plan within Dow to replicate this, across the site. So not to be a naysayer, I know we've seen lots of progress and, we're really hopeful that it goes forward. Does that significantly reduce the size of the projects, assuming... Does that make sense? Does my question make sense?
As I remember our conversation, I think we were talking about, Dow's public ambition is to be net zero by 2050, right? Mm-hmm. So what we have here in Fort Saskatchewan and what you see is actually similar to multiple other large sites that Dow has around the world. So part of the excitement around this project is to establish the baseline for what we will need to do really at all of our sites over the next 27 to 28 years to reach our target, right? So that's both that's why there's both a lot of momentum for the project here in Fort Saskatchewan, but also the risk side of it, the work we're doing is applicable in other sites as well, right? So I think that's maybe perhaps what we were speaking with is Fort Saskatchewan certainly has a leg up for a number of reasons here, but if once we go ahead, the goal would be to then take and immediately move to several of our other sites. Now, if we run into challenges here with this project, we would, of course, I think we'd be ready to move to the next site as well. So it's not a slam dunk. And that's why we continue to be cautious because, again, Dow's ambition is to repeat this.
So I guess it's a matter of when, not...
Yes.
You get what I mean? So it's still going to go forward, but
That's
it's just
correct.
a matter of when, right? Okay, thank you. My second question is to Ryan on just Indigenous relations, and I really appreciate all of the work that you guys are doing in that area. But, I didn't really hear what we're doing with our local Indigenous society. So I know that Mayor Kacha talked about the flag poles, which is amazing. I was there attending that ceremony. What is there work that's being done with our local Indigenous society?
That's probably something that we could take back. I mean, like I said, we've really been ramping up our efforts with the nearby nations over the last, I would say, 12 to 18 months. And we'd welcome any partnerships that we can make if there's a local Indigenous group here in the city. Okay.
Yes, so in addition to what Ryan mentioned, it is a long-term journey that we are on, and we are aware that there is more work for us to do. Some examples of our local partnership is on Indigenous Day, we participated in the Cardiff Indigenous Day Festival in Sturgeon County that was hosted by Creating Hope Society and Families First and supported by Dow and our volunteers. So that's one local example. We were also present in some of the local initiatives that that group, as well as other Indigenous members, have hosted here, including the Red Dress Day to mark missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in Legacy Park, and we are also in talks with the recently formed Indigenous Society of Fort Saskatchewan about partnership opportunities. And so what I will say is that discussions are happening with local partnerships. So stay tuned for that and for more examples of what we can do locally.
Well, that's excellent. Thank you. And that was such a valuable industrial partner. We really definitely appreciate of your work. Thank you.
Councillor Nguyen.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for the presentation this afternoon. It's certainly exciting to see the direction you're going in. I think you bring us more answers than we have questions a lot of times, which is phenomenal. And to see how much you're prepared, I appreciate as well the partnership that you're getting with Skills Canada. I remember being involved in a competition with them. That was one of the highlights of my high school. So it's a great program. My question, I think, for you, perhaps Marcella, is there an ETA on the traffic impact assessment? We're obviously talking about infrastructure projects perhaps going through in the near future in council, and I was wondering when council might see the results of that.
So the study is in progress, and we do expect a draft by the end of July.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, and we'll be once we have that, we'll be engaging with both the City of Fort Saskatchewan and also Strathcona County, because they are also affected as well.
Great. That's even better than what I was expecting to hear. And then my second question, it mentions and I know it's a very new policy, the Indigenous Inclusion Policy, about signing agreements with 4 First Nations. Is that mainly workforce agreements, or can you elaborate on what type of agreements you're looking to?
So
Go ahead
we haven't signed 4 agreements with the 4 nations. We've engaged with them. So there's our project doesn't have a legal duty to consult. Like, consult comes with several more formal steps and things like that. But regardless, our plan is to engage with them. We've signed one memorandum of understanding with Alexander. We intend to with the others, but we've got to work with them kind of on a one-on-one basis. They're very different. The agreements so far are very relationship based. So, outlining things like, how will we engage with them, on what frequency and at what levels, and these types of things. And I would say the bulk of our work has been working on how to bring in some Indigenous members into. We know we're going to be short of trades, in particular welders, these types of things. How can we incentivize that? And in many cases, like Alexander, for example, has their own kind of suite of businesses, which are really good jobs for their nation's members. So they actually prefer, rather than us go and try and convince their kids in high schools to go to engineering and NAIT and these types of things, use their businesses where it makes sense and is appropriate, to allow them to grow their businesses and more jobs, and kind of in a more local way. Not sure if that answered your question exactly, but
it does. That's beyond the level of detail I was looking for and elaborating about that. I was wondering kind of what that meant, what that looked like for the future of those partnerships.
Yeah, so the agreements are very high level and relationship. They're not formal, because there is no formal required.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So I'll thank you once again. And I'm just going to say, I think every event that I go to, you always have somebody there representing Dow. And I know Alana does an amazing job, and she brings her kids out to the round dances and to everything that happens at Legacy Park. And I know, Michael, you come out to many of the events as well. So you always do have representation, and your Dow diamond sticks out. So continue with your community social support. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to an announcement this fall. So thank you once again. So you're welcome to stay, but you're also welcome to leave, because I know you have very busy schedules. So thank you. So the next presentation that we have is Heartland Housing Foundation, Nancy Simmons and Mike Derbyshire. Did I get it right this time? There we go. Derbyshire. And we have 20 minutes for your presentation.
Good afternoon, Mayor Katcher and Council. My name is Mike Derbyshire, and I am the Board Chair of the Heartland Housing Foundation. I'm joined today by Heartland's Chief Executive Officer, Nancy Simmons. As most of you know, our board is made up of 7 voting members, represented in part by councillors from the City of Fort Saskatchewan and Strathcona County, as well as 3 community members. Councillor Abatoye and Councillor Macon currently represent your council, as well as Councillor Kelly, who serves as a member of our Finance, Audit and Risk Management Committee. We appreciate the time to meet with the Committee of the Whole to provide some key updates to the successes of Heartland over the past year. There we go. Heartland Housing, as you know, was formed in 2013 and is the housing management body that serves both Fort Saskatchewan and Strathcona County. Historically, housing management bodies were formed by provincial ministerial orders to provide lodge housing for Alberta communities in partnership with municipalities. Today, many housing management bodies, including Heartland Housing, provide other types of housing and programs for the communities that we serve. We operate 2 main types of housing, apartments and lodges. We have apartments for independent housing that are for all ages, and other apartments that are specifically for people aged 65 years or older. Lodges, on the other hand, are for people 65 years of older only, and are housing options that provide non-medical supports like meals, recreation, and housekeeping. We're very proud to provide safe, attainable housing for over 900 community members across 12 properties in the City of Fort Saskatchewan and Strathcona County. Recently, we also became the local delivery agent for the Provincial Rent Assistance Benefit Program, and Nancy will have more to say about that in a few minutes. In the community, Heartland Housing Foundation is known as an affordable housing provider. We define affordable housing explicitly to mean housing that costs 30% or less of a household's income. So we define our portfolios as providing 2 rent streams, either affordable housing or near market housing. The near market stream is where we set rent to be 15 to 30% below average market rents. There are income-based eligibility requirements for our near market apartments, but not for our near market lodges. These income-based eligibility requirements are established to ensure that we're meeting the highest needs within our communities. Our other stream is the affordable, or what we call our rent geared to income stream. At these properties, rent is fixed at 30% of a tenant's income, regardless of what their income is. Again, income-based eligibility for these apartments is required within the affordable rental stream, and in the event there are wait lists, applicants may be priority scored. In our rent geared to income apartments, tenants pay 30% of their income on their rent, and in our RGI lodges, the rent or shelter portion of monthly costs are set at 30% of a resident's income, with an additional fixed monthly service package for meals, housekeeping, and recreation supports. Our near market properties, where rent is set to a fixed amount below average market rates, are 100% self-sustaining based on rents and do not receive subsidies from any level of government. These properties include Silver Birch Court, Silver Birch Haven, and Silver Birch Manor, and the new Muriel Ross Abdurrahman Court. Our affordable or RGI apartments are specifically for folks 65 years of age or older and mainly funded through rents, with some subsidy from the province to cover any operating or capital shortfalls. These include Lakeside Legion Manor, Apple Blossom Manor, Dr. Henry House, Fort Lyons Haven, and Homestead Place in Josephburg. Finally, we have our affordable lodges, where the rent portion of monthly fees is set to a resident's income. These lodges are funded through a combination of rents, provincial funding, and municipal funding. Municipal funding in this case is provided through an annual requisition that appears on property tax bills alongside other essential services like the municipal library. These lodges are Clover Bar Lodge, Silver Birch Lodge, and Dr. Turner Lodge. Moving on to governance for a second, in late 2021, the provincial government released their Stronger Foundations Affordable Housing Strategy, which outlines 5 key themes to be achieved over the next 10 years that will make the housing system more accessible, affordable, and sustainable for the province. One key theme of this strategy was to increase capacity, planning, and governance with a specific action item aimed at ensuring all operators, housing management bodies, follow best practices, and housing management body board appointments are to be competency-based. Through strong governance leadership, our board has been able to effectively expand its board membership to now include three community members, in addition to the existing 4 council-appointed members. These new community member appointments, through this action, Heartland was able to attract a few people with extensive experience in design, construction, and leadership roles. Our board growth has resulted in an expanded skill set, diversity, and expertise to our work. We now measure the diversity and skill set of our board using a comprehensive skills matrix. This will be valuable in transition years where new councillors or community members may be onboarded to ensure we seek appointments specifically for gaps within our existing board skills makeup. Additionally, we have spent a lot of time in the last year focusing on our governance model to ensure that we are maximizing the valuable time that our volunteer board members and councillors. So we've created 3 board committees to focus on the business needs of our organization. These are our governance committee, our finance and audit and risk management committee, and our capital planning committee. We have reduced our board as a whole meetings to 4 per year to allow us to broaden our conversations together with strategic planning, and our committees are focused on the deep dive work that's required to help the organization out. I'll now pass it over to Nancy to speak a little bit more about Heartland's advocacy and the work that we have coming up ahead.
Thank you, Mike, and good afternoon, Mayor Ketcher and Council. Beyond our bricks and mortar based work to bring attainable housing to our communities, Heartland Housing Foundation is also an active force in advocating for expanding attainable housing opportunities across all levels of government. In part, we achieve this by actively participating in housing-focused organizations in our province. We're happy to report that we sit as board members currently for 3 of these 4 associations listed. The Alberta Seniors and Community Housing Association advocates for provincial housing needs. The Alberta Public Housing Administrators Association offers professional development for nonprofit and housing management body leaders, as well as future leaders. The Alberta Rural and Remote Regional Advisory Board administrates the federal Reaching Home funding through the National Housing Strategy. And finally, the Alberta Residential Landlord Association is an association located in Edmonton dedicated to strengthening the residential rental industry. In addition to these provincial associations, we also participate in various cross-provincial associations and conferences. There have been a few moments over the past year where we've been able to see the light at the end of the tunnel as a result of some critical advocacy work that Heartland has been a part of. Heartland Housing Foundation is now the local delivery agent for the Provincial Rent Assistance Benefit, supporting more equitable access to these funds for the communities we serve. We're also very happy to report that our partnership with the City of Fort Saskatchewan for our rent subsidy program for eligible tenants of the Muriel Rossab Durman Court is now up and running with the opening of the building over the last few weeks. This funding will provide a deeper subsidy to those still paying over 45% of their income on rent, even after the existing 20% rental subsidy is built into our existing housing model. And I would just like to take this moment to pause and recognize how much of a difference this has made for several individuals who are already accessing this benefit. To be able to allow them to move in with a deeper subsidy for them has made an incredible difference in their lives, even in this first month, just having talked to them when they've moved in. Through our representation on boards such as AFA and ASHA, Heartland is also advocating for suitable funding to maintain provincially owned assets that have been underfunded both operationally and in capital investments over several years. In order to provide suitable and safe housing to seniors in our community long term, we will require the government to invest more in these rent geared to income modeled programs. We also continue to advocate for a review of the Lodge program, which would initiate a call to action for the province to review the allocation of provincial and municipal investments within this program. And as we prepare for the development of the First Street project in Strathcona County, we are anticipating opportunities to apply for funding with the federal government through CMHC as well as FCM programs. In addition, there is new funding to be announced under the Affordable Housing Partnership Program that has been designed by the provincial government. Here we have an opportunity to celebrate what has really been a long game adventure, not only for us at Heartland Housing Foundation, but for this community. The picture shown here is a snapshot of our newly opened apartment building in Fort Saskatchewan, the highly anticipated Muriel Ross Abderrahmane Court. Opening day for the first move-ins was June 19th, and we are very happy to start welcoming them into the building. Over the next several weeks, we anticipate to have at least half the building filled and occupied, with additional units being occupied throughout the summer. As a final report to Council, we thought this would be a good time to summarize how this project came to be and celebrate the many milestones we have shared together. Within our funding agreements through CMHC and the Green Municipality Fund, we have three primary conditions to maintain for the next 20 years. One is affordability, which will have all 83 units having 20% below the median market rent as the established rental rate. 20% of all the units will be accessible and follow the accessibility guidelines. And finally, that we as an organization in our development will achieve net zero design for the building. While I won't go into great detail, I am always very excited to share how we designed this building in order to achieve net zero. A building of similar size and units is estimated to use 760,000 kilowatt hours in energy annually. The design team was tasked to include features in the building that would reduce overall consumption through the design of the building envelope, mechanical systems, and building operations. Through the efficiencies of these three areas, we were able to reduce the overall consumption by 230,000 kilowatt hours per year. The balance of the energy, the 530,000 kilowatt hours, determined the amount of solar energy needed for the building, which equated to approximately 1,100 solar panels that have been designed for the rooftop as well as the carports. It is expected that our solar panels will generate in excess of energy needed for the building, and we will be able to gain small savings from selling back to the grid over the course of a full year. As a result of our design eliminating the use of natural gas, we have also improved our greenhouse gas emissions by 34%. Shifting gears a little bit, we now look to the future as a starting point with what the needs are for our community and where the growth is anticipated. Earlier this year, we commissioned the Rural Development Network to develop a bespoke, gap-specific needs and demand assessment for Fort Saskatchewan and Strathcona County to support strategic decision-making at Heartland Housing Foundation and inform our advocacy work locally as well as provincially. While some key data sets are still delayed from StatsCan, we can share some key points with you now. From a demographic standpoint, we are seeing growth in the over 65 group, with nearly a quarter of the region's population projected to be 65 years of age or older in the next 30 years. From a household standpoint, we are seeing growth in all family types, but the greatest increase is in two-person households with no children. From the data, we continue to see that unaffordability remains the main issue facing our rental population. Most impacted with this group are small households and larger households, especially acute need in benefit recipient households. One of the components that determine core housing need is the affordability of the unit against a household's income within their respective community. Within the data, we are seeing significant findings in the percentage of renters in core housing need, with a range of 17 to 21% between our two municipalities. As leaders in shaping innovative and affordable housing, we are proud of the work we do internally to create community-focused impacts in our programs, advocacy work, and person-centered relationships. With a brand new development coming to fruition in Fort Saskatchewan, we are proud to continue meeting the growing needs for housing to ensure we can support individuals and families to thrive and live well here in their community. We have also been fortunate to help administer one-time housing subsidies in Strathcona County through Bridging the Gap program, which is a partnership with faith-based funders and the county's Family and Community Services branch, addressing acute financial needs in order to maintain and often stabilize recipients' housing. Through the program, we have supported 18 households in community in maintaining their housing stability. As previously mentioned, we are now the delivery agent of the provincial rent subsidy and started issuing subsidies in June. Including the existing recipients being transferred to our portfolio and additional funding provided to us by the province, we anticipate serving approximately 80 households annually with rental subsidies and will continue to advocate for increased funding as we are already seeing a growing wait list for this benefit. And finally, Seniors Week that just passed included lots of fun activities in our lodges, as well as an opportunity for Heartland to present at various activities within the community, specifically the We Seniors on the June 5th day, which allowed us an opportunity to share with community members more about the seniors programming that we offer. And here are just a few of the snapshots of the seniors over the course of our Seniors Week that's celebrated within our lodges. We'd like to take this opportunity to thank Council for their continued support and advisory role played at our board level. Heartland Housing Foundation is proud to help lead the future of affordable housing in this community through your continued support. Mike and I would like to thank you for the opportunity to be with you today, and we would pass this over to you if there's any questions or comments.
Okay, thank you very much for that presentation. I'll open it up for questions of council. Councillor Harris.
One thing that's been kind of percolating in the background is what the status of the old Dr. Turner Lodge site is, and whether you've made or whether you see it as your responsibility to work with the provincial government to get them to make a decision that would be in our positive community interest. Any news in that regard?
Through Mayor Ketcher to Councillor Harris, with the new with the finalized election, there's been a lot of on hold work with the affordable housing strategy from the province, and specifically in relation to land that is waiting to be developed. They have a sequence of housing that they're looking to develop on first, and that is in a bit of a holding pattern for any land that doesn't have buildings existing on it as to what they're going to do with the land. We continue to provide letters to them to ensure they understand our eagerness to work with them on a future development, whether it's on that piece of land or somewhere more might be able to have a larger impact to the community. So we continue to have the conversation. They just haven't made any advancements on their vacant land at this time.
So it is one of the responsibilities of your organization to try to put the best foot forward relative to housing needs in our community, and that's one of them, obviously.
Yeah, and on an annual basis, we do submit our business plan to the province, which continues to speak of the housing development we would like to put on that piece of land.
Good, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you. Nice to see you folks today. A couple questions or observations, if I may. The first one I'd like to just touch on Councillor Harris's line of questioning. I think it's important maybe to stress, at least, and I'll do it, Nancy, if I'm wrong, please correct me, or Michael, but before Heartland can do anything of a development nature, we need to have the funding. The funding, Nancy, to arrange and finalize the funding for Muriel Ross of Durham Court took approximately how many years?
Probably 4 years.
It's not an easy task. And the province owns that property, Councillor Harris, as I'm sure you know. So for us to have any impact as an organization, or for Heartland to have any impact as an organization, we need to have the funding in place first. So you're chasing your tail half the time. It's difficult. So that's the first observation. The second one, Nancy, you touched on in your presentation the grant in lieu of property taxes and what it meant for the current operating year. I'm familiar with it. As a former board member, I'd like it if you would stress the importance of that to your residents, and maybe comment, if you could, on whether or not you see a long-term need for that type of participation from the city of Fort Saskatchewan.
Sure. Through Mayor Ketcher to Councillor Kelly, we weren't sure of what the need would be for our community. Being the first development for housing of all ages in our community, we've gathered a lot of data over the last 8 months of what the need is in the community. And when we first initiated this conversation of finding a way to create a grant for the property tax exemption, these first 20 years that we're under the operating agreement, it's critical that we create a space for 20% subsidy for the tenants, but clearly the data of the applicants we've received are showing that there is even greater need for a subsidy. So the people that have been awarded this grant are still paying 45% of their income on rent, even when it is subsidized by 20%. So there's a population that needs to be served in Fort Saskatchewan through this additional subsidy, and it's being used very wisely in our housing. What's critical for us is being able to establish housing stability for the people that we serve, and so offering them the opportunity for this grant longer term for them to stabilize their housing is going to be critical. And it would be part of our grant submission in the coming year, looking for a longer term guarantee of the funding so that we can ensure those people can live with us and not have to look for housing outside of this community at a cheaper rate.
Thank you. If I may, Mayor Catcher, just a question of administration, perhaps you, Troy, if I could. It sticks in my mind that council did address through a presentation from administration a new policy, or I think to our procedure to allow approval for multi-year funding for certain organizations. I see Heather nodding her head. Could you elaborate on that, please, and maybe indicate whether or not Heartland would qualify?
Through the community grants program, we did indicate in there that there was a possibility for organizations to receive multi-year funding to provide stable services. So that the grants were coming to you to be reviewed August 22nd.
And have you indicated to the applicants the ability to have a multi-year application? I see Nancy nodding, so I'll take that as the affirmative. Thank you, Mayor Catcher.
Okay, thank you. I've got a couple of questions. So the first one, so what are your wait lists right now for the different TW Henry, Alliance Haven, the Lodge? What are your wait lists? Or do you have wait lists?
It's a good question. We always have wait lists within our senior self-contained buildings. Like we have 5 buildings in total. So we typically have a wait list for seniors who are looking for that independent housing where it's rent geared to income. Our lodges are full at the moment, and we're slowly regaining that wait list. So we usually have a couple of people on the wait list ready to move in. It's nothing like we would have seen 5 or 6 years ago pre-COVID, where there was very strong wait lists. I think it's just a lagging indicator that COVID is still a bit of a fear for some, and we're just regaining that, and we're happy to be full again after the impacts of COVID.
Okay. And second question, do you have asset tests for all of your facilities?
So asset testing is required for our senior self-contained. It is not a requirement for the lodge program, and that's defined by the provincial government. And then our near market housing, so all buildings similar to Muriel Court does have asset testing. So similar to the province, individuals or families can have upwards of $25,000 in assets. And after that, it becomes part of a point scoring system of where they would fall in the priority.
Okay, and the last one, I don't understand, you said you've got 80 for provincial rent subsidy. Is that in those places or have you got something different? I don't understand that one.
So the provincial rental subsidy is a province-wide program that is administered, I'm not sure of the number, but we'll say 20 to 30 operators across the province to ensure where market rent is not achievable for households, that rental payment subsidies can be issued to those individuals. So it's not necessarily just our housing, it is for the entire rental market across the province. So rental subsidies would be issued to individuals to reduce their rental cost if it doesn't align with their income, that rent to income ratio.
Okay, I may come back for another question on that one. Councillor Abatoye.
Thank you, folks, for your presentation. It's so lovely to see you this afternoon. I'm just going to follow up on the 45% people that still pay 45% of their income after the 20% subsidy. About how many people are these that are using these grants? Do you have a number?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
So you talked about people that you're applying the grants to, right? That are still paying 45%. So do you have a number for how many people are using these grants?
Yes. So to initiate the program, knowing that we don't have a guaranteed year over year program just yet, we have issued 18 subsidies in that building. We have the opportunity, if we find out that the grant would be approved in subsequent years, that we could go upwards of 40 households that could receive the grant.
Okay, thank you. And just my second question, just to the Stronger Foundations strategy and the importance of increasing capacity and, the skill matrix gaps and all of those things regarding the board, how do we intend to deal with that?
That's a great question. And one of the challenges we face, I think, as a board moving forward in terms of complying with the Stronger Foundations and the amendments to the Act is the fact that councillors are appointed to our board and we don't have any say in how councillors get appointed to our board. We've met with Mayor Katcher and we continue to impress upon our councillor colleagues that striving to achieve the gaps, to fill the gaps that are created when existing board members move on as a result of their terms expiring or other reasons. Having a conversation with councils in advance of or shortly after those vacancies are created will allow us to, I think, be proactive in terms of councillors who would be able to fill those gaps on our board. So, for example, we have mechanisms if we needed an accountant, for example. Luckily, we have Councillor Kelly, who has volunteered to come and be a part of our Finance and Audit and Risk Management Committee as a ad hoc member. Most councils don't have an accountant, for example. And so the skills matrix that the government has created is very general, but it does give us some really good guidelines in terms of ensuring we have balance on our board. And as of this point, we're fully compliant with those requirements. And so we're monitoring, we're keenly aware of what we need to do, and having conversations with both mayors has allowed us to have that open door policy around what we might need in the future.
Okay, thank you. Just one little last final question. When you're taking applications for this, buildings, do you prioritize residents, or how do we deal with, that?
Specifically to our new building?
Yes.
So we did have an open call where we would have locals be able to submit their applications. And now it's on a first come, first served basis. So I think the intention is that whether or not they're a resident today, if they're planning to move here, that's where their community is or where they're moving towards their community. So there's not a specific requirement to be a resident other than the fact that they're meaningfully wanting to move here to this community.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Blissard.
Hi, thanks for your presentation. I was on the board
a number of years ago, so I'm familiar with it. But are all the places at capacity? I know in Sherwood Park, when I drove by Silver Birch Manor, I think it's called, there was a for rent sign there for a long time, even after it had been built. So are most of the places at capacity?
Yes, currently we are at capacity. There's always a circulation of move outs,
Yeah.
but specifically to the Haven that did have a long-term plan to fill it in because it did open during COVID. We celebrated, I want to say it was in March of this year, where we completely filled that building, and it's very vibrant now, full of residents. So we have no occupancy issues. We are even incredibly proud of our team for how they've managed to fill Muriel Court in such a expedited manner. Is phenomenal. That there's 48 units that moved in over the last 2.5 weeks is just incredible of our team.
And that was my next question, was so with the Abdurrahman Court, how was the capacity there? And I know I had a tour and the units are very, very nice, but the studios in particular are quite small. Are they still filling up?
They are. So we're at 71% occupancy right now, with the scheduled move-ins we have over the summer. So that should be increasing over the next couple months because we continue to receive applications, and we aren't finding any trouble filling those studio units. They are mostly full at this point.
So you feel you'll be at maximum at some point?
Our hope is by the end of this year we'll be full.
Good. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I have to go back to that, and I don't like to take all the questions. I still don't understand. So you could have people living in a rental house and receiving rental subsidy from Heartland Housing?
So let me try again. There's two mechanisms in which the province can provide housing subsidies. One is with their housing stock, so the assets they own, which is that rent geared to income model. So our Dr. Henry House, those buildings that are owned by the province. So they create affordable housing through their own assets. The other mechanism is creating a subsidy program, because they know they can't make up the entire market of rental. It has to be a mix of private and government funded. So this housing subsidy is to offer additional housing supplements to people who may be in near market housing who are still at that 45% of income. They can get another subsidy to offset their costs, but it's also eligible for any private rental markets in the province to create a better ratio of rent to income. They have to be approved rental properties. It can't necessarily be a basement suite that isn't properly registered or anything like that. There is some guidelines on who is eligible for that rental subsidy. So it is formulated through lease agreements that we receive. We're only the administrators of that subsidy. It's funding directly from the province, and we just help administer it for our community.
Okay, and that was my next question. So it is directly from the government. Okay, awesome. Okay, that looks like all of the questions. So thank you very much for coming out. Your tour of the new Muriel Abdurrahman Court is fantastic, and it's nice to start seeing some of the balconies populate with chairs and things, and add some new people into our downtown, hopefully. So great job to everybody, and I know this is now swept 1, 2, almost 3 councils terms to get to this point. So it takes a lot of links in the chain to make these things happen. So great. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay, the next item we have is Fort Saskatchewan minor football with a charity event request. So welcome. We have Lawrence McMath. I'll let you do introductions, and we've got 10 minutes set up for your presentation.
Sorry, pardon me. Good afternoon, Mayor Catcher and Council. So I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Lawrence McMath. I am the president for the Fort Saskatchewan Minor Football Association.
I'm Melanie Thorson. I'm the Communications Director for Fort Saskatchewan Minor Football Association.
And I'm Ryan Nerbus. I'm the Equipment Director for the association.
And excuse me for a sec, I will close their presentation for them. All right. So firstly, I'd like to thank you for giving us time today to discuss our application for the Tourism Housing Grant for use of Taurus Field for our 24-hour flag football charity event for the Stollery Children's Foundation, which will be held August 11th through to the 12th at Taurus Field. When we initially applied, we were denied and were told that because it was not for a local charity, it did not meet the requirements. But the Stollery is a local charity, and it takes care of dozens of families in Fort Saskatchewan. Any child in Fort Saskatchewan that requires medical care most likely will end up receiving care at the Stollery Hospital. Currently, our local hospital doesn't even have a fully functioning maternity ward, so all of Fort Saskatchewan residents are required to deliver their children outside of the community. Ryan, who is a member of our football family, is just one of many Fort Saskatchewan families that is lucky enough to have access to the Stollery Hospital. We are asking for our grant request to be reviewed again and that the grant be approved to help us with our goal of raising funds for the Stollery Hospital Children's Foundation. We are a non-for-profit minor sport association, and the money that we do receive goes right back right back into providing safe quality equipment for our kids to play football and provide the best training possible for our coaches and staff to provide a safe environment for our kids. We are also leaders in community fundraising for Fort Saskatchewan as well. Every year we put on a Tackle Hunger event and a toy drive for our local community to help and assist those families that are in need. Again, we would like to thank you for your time and answer any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions of Councillor Kelly?
Yes, and thank you folks for taking your time to come today. I need to clarify a comment you made in your presentation.
Yes, sir.
Probably through admin. It's my understanding, and I sit on the grants committee, so for full clarity here.
No problem.
But it's my understanding that local or non-local doesn't matter. Charitable purposes aren't qualified under the grant program. So did you actually get a response that said because it's not a local charity, or is that an interpretation?
That was the response that we had received. So I didn't receive the email personally.
Would admin like to speak to that if possible, please?
Through your worship, I don't have the policy in front of me. I will pull it up, but my understanding, having read it just a few days ago, is that it's local or non-local is irrelevant. The community grants program doesn't support fundraisers, period.
And thanks, that was my understanding as well. So perhaps we could formalize a response back to address that concern. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any additional questions at this point in time. Your meeting or your request comes before council would be able to put a notice of motion on, which wouldn't be able to come back until August 22nd. You know, I know and I'm just going to speak to this. I know I was contacted by at least two of you, and I explained again the same process, the fact that we don't provide funding for flow through events. So if you were having something and requested a silent auction item or $200 or $300 to help you buy, you know, like your hot dogs or hamburgers for one of your, we've got promotional money that we can utilize for that. But our policy, the reason we set it up the way we did is because we get so many requests. Everybody does a fundraiser, then they give money to the food bank, they give it to Families First, they give it to Cancer Society, they give it to Juvenile Diabetes. I go to all of these events and I support them when I go to those. And that's why the policy was written the way it was. So, you know, council has the opportunity, you know, to hear your request if if they want to waive that, I would require a motion of council to be able to do that. And I would require a notice of motion from somebody at the end of this meeting to do that. So your timing isn't great.
Understandable.
But, you know, I think what you're doing is admirable. It teaches the children, you know, really good, meaningful community responsibility in that, but it just doesn't fall within this, and we are responsible for taxpayers' funding. So that's kind of where we're sitting at this point in time. You know, if you required something, you know, a small, you know, little financial donation, I could, you know, we could give out a promotional account to help with something, we can do that. But you know, unless I get a notice of motion, then administration will let you know tomorrow, okay?
Okay. Yeah, that you stated it yourself. A big reason why we do these community events is to teach the kids about giving back to community. It is very important, and it is something that we are finding is lost, and we're trying to be responsible in helping guide them to be the future leaders of this community. So that is why we approached and asked for the cost of the field rental to be well, for the grant to cover the cost of the field rental. So we do appreciate your time though and understand.
Okay. Thank you very much for coming out and speaking to us today. We wish you success on your event.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want a 5-minute break? Okay, I think we're going to take a 10-minute, just a 10-minute break before we get into the next item. So 3:23, we'll make it 3:45. We'll be back. Okay. Well, that's 20 minutes, 10 minutes. 3. Okay, we will resume from our recess and begin with item 7.1, Indoor Recreation Facility Program, Section 2.
Good afternoon, Your Worship and Council. I'm Brad Babiak, Director of Culture and Recreation, and I'm joined today by Mike Roma from RC Strategies, as well as Rob Parks, who's joining us in the gallery. Also in attendance is Lindsay Portress, Supervisor of the Dow Centennial Center, Arena, and Torres Field, and Kayla Dow, Supervisor of the Harbor Pool. The purpose of this presentation today is to share the work of RC Strategies on developing a recommended facility program for indoor recreation in Fort Saskatchewan, and to request a decision on adapting it to proceed to concept planning. In terms of background, at the May 10th, 2002 regular council meeting, council endorsed the Indoor Recreation Service Level Review. That would include aquatics, arenas, and fitness. This review had 3 sections of work to complete. The first section examined harbor pool condition, and that was presented to council on February 21st, 2023. The second section is what we're here to discuss today, which is the development of a facility program, which is the result of collecting and analyzing data from 7 sources of information outlined in the graphic on this slide. If this facility program is approved, or a version of it, work would then progress on 3 concept options that would be developed to illustrate how the facility program could be implemented in the harbor pool, the Dow Centennial Center, or a combination of both facilities. With that, I'll turn things over to Mike Roma to explain how the facility program was developed.
Thank you, Brad. Your Worship, members of council, members of admin, thanks for having us here today. To do just as Brad said, tell you about the work we've done around what we think the future could hold for indoor facilities in the city. I'll just draw your attention to the middle of this image, and that is in effect the different inputs that have gone into the punchlines that I'll share with you in a few slides. So fairly extensive, and I'll explain all of those shortly. Before I do that, I want to go through a couple of definitions. It can get a little bit confusing. I'm not an architect. Some of these are architectural type terms, but just wanted to kind of set the ground rules for the presentation a bit. First is the definition of facility. So facility is the actual physical manifestation of different amenities. So the facility is the structure. A facility can house a variety of different amenities. An amenity is the other term that I wanted to make sure is clear with you. So amenities are the program areas, the activity areas that are within a facility. So some of your facilities have multiple amenities in them. Some of your facilities only have one main amenity in them. A support amenity is just something that, kind of helps or complements those activity spaces, but it isn't kind of the main reason somebody would visit a facility. And maybe the most colorful and exciting one is natatorium. I don't know if you've heard that term before or not. I think I might have mentioned it the last time I was in front of you, but that is really the wet environment in a pool facility. So the natatorium is kind of like the tiled areas, the areas that you're not allowed to wear your shoes in unless you put those special socks on. The other thing to clarify is the in-scope amenities that we've looked at. So there's 4 in-scope amenities. This goes back to the original direction council gave admin a number of months ago. The first is leisure aquatics. Leisure aquatics is kind of the fun and splashy areas in a natatorium. So less structured, not swim competitions. Kind of you can go and participate at any time that the facility is open. And it's really more about kind of family time or splashing around. Some of the amenities, some of the features of leisure aquatics are things like water slides, wave pools, spray features, things that some of which you have in your existing facility and some of which you'd see in other facilities. The next is program aquatics. So again, that's in the natatorium, but significantly different enough from leisure aquatics that we've split the 2 up. And program aquatics is really more about that kind of structured activity that happens in a natatorium, swim clubs, competitions, even lane swimming for fitness and that type of thing. The third is fitness, and fitness is really kind of like the fitness and wellness areas, strength and cardio, weight training areas, including walking track that you'd see at the DCC. And the fourth is arenas, and those are fairly straightforward. Obviously, your ice arenas that people participate in and play sports in. There is reference to your priority-based budgeting on this list too, just to kind of help you focus in on that element of the presentation. So in order to kind of make sense of all of those inputs that we've uncovered and answer the questions put forward to admin and to us as a consulting team as to what to do about those 4 different in-scope amenities, we used a 4-step framework to do that. The first step is about assessing service levels. So that's looking at those 4 different types of amenities that you have right now and trying to determine whether or not those are meeting needs right now, whether there could warrant maybe investment now to improve quantity or quality, possibly even if maybe we have too much of a certain amenity and we could think about limiting. I'll go through kind of the outcomes of that service level, but it's really just about whether or not we have the right quantity and quality of those 4 different types of amenities across all of our facilities. The next step is once we have an idea of whether we're doing, say, a good job or we have an appropriate service level in each of those areas, then we look to prioritize those 4 different amenities against each other. And the reason why we have to do that is you have limited resources, as does any municipality. And I think I've said this before, and I know you're all aware of it, the demand for these kind of services can be insatiable, or usually is insatiable. So we're always going to be asked for more, and we can't make everybody happy in the recreation and parks world. So we know we have to prioritize. So the next step is prioritizing. The third step is thinking about asset management. So that's the assets that you currently have, making sure that you're investing enough in those to sustain existing service levels, if that's warranted or not, and kind of doing the right things as it relates to being good stewards of that physical infrastructure that you've invested in and that you've built. One thing to note here, as it relates to asset management and recreation facilities specifically, is there's a little bit of a different dynamic when it comes to rec facilities, because it's not just making sure the structure is in good shape, the lights work, the mechanical systems work. It's also about whether or not those spaces meet modern user expectations, whether they're relevant, whether they're seen as functional or can meet different kinds of requirements that are put in place for different types of activities and so on. And it's a little bit different than looking at a road or a bridge or even a water treatment plant or other assets that municipalities have. And then the last step is pulling that all together and coming out with amenity action plans. So thinking about whether we have the right service level, thinking about where we've prioritized a certain amenity, thinking about the asset management of our existing facilities and spaces, and then pulling it all together, looking at how we would move forward or how we'd recommend you move forward. Oops. So the different criteria that we looked at apply to both step 1 and step 2 in different ways. So in determining the service level, the things that we looked at were general public preference, organized group or contributor preference. So that's based mostly on the engagement work that we've done. Utilization of existing amenities, participation trends and demographics, supply within the region, and supply compared to other municipalities. So those are the things that we look at to determine whether or not we have the right service level right now. Whether we could maybe think about adjusting it or we should kind of maintain where we're at. There's 4 additional criteria in addition to the ones I just went through that help us prioritize. So those first ones help us prioritize one amenity against another too. But the ones that aren't really relevant to service level but can help us figure out where we'd put our limited resources are the cost. So obviously that's a big one. Social impact, partner investment. So social impact is, call it the majority impact for all of your residents. Partner investment is, should you have a community partner or a grant program or something that's specific to an amenity, it might change how you think about investing in that amenity. And the last is economic impact. And that's not necessarily a primary driver for parks and recreation, but it's definitely a positive outcome that can come from having good indoor recreation facilities. So when we looked at all of those inputs and across the 4 different amenity types, the results are up on the screen here. And there's a lot of paperwork that I think many of you have probably looked at in preparation for this presentation. So there is obviously a paper trail, but this is the punchline. First off, the service level for leisure and program aquatics rendered an enhanced result, which means that you could, if you were able to invest, if you could afford it, you could improve both the kind of the quality and the quantity of those 2 amenities based on the scoring that was done and those initial criteria that were looked at. For arenas and fitness, they rendered a maintain service level. So what that means is as you grow, maybe as conditions change, you might think about investing more in either one of those 2 different types of amenities. But as of right now, there isn't enough kind of justification for us to sit here in front of you and say, you need to improve service levels in those areas any more than you've already committed to as council and as a city. In terms of prioritization, you can see there's a score and a rank. Well, obviously the ones that score highest are going to rank higher. So leisure aquatics and program aquatics coincidentally both scored high, very high in terms of prioritization, meaning that those are the 2 amenities of these 4 that we believe or recommend that you focus on moving forward at this point in time. What's interesting about this is they have the same score, but they didn't arrive at that score in the same way. So leisure and program aquatics, like I said before, are different enough, even though they're both in the natatorium, they're both swimming, they're different. And the reasons why they scored differently are things like event hosting, like social impact, cost, not really, they cost about the same, but they arrived at those scores in different ways. Arenas and fitness scored 44 and 39 respectively, so you can see relatively high, I guess, in terms of overall score, but there's definitely a gap between the highest ranked amenities and the 2 lower ranked amenities. And I would say that it's important to note all of these amenities are important in a community. They all lead to a variety of different benefits. They probably drive some of the quality of life and passion that all of you have on council, and I know admin and residents have. But a tough decision, a tough part of our job is to try to funnel limited resources. And at this point, we suggest that leisure aquatics and program aquatics do rank the highest. So just a little bit more about what that means. So we're getting into kind of this action plan step now. So the last step. I talked about the current state last time I was in front of you, not last time a team member was in front of you, but last time I was in front of you. And we know that the current facility does require some necessary reinvestment and modernization, and also that there's some functional limitations that exist with the facility. And I think those have been well documented during this process and in past studies. A recommended program, or what moving forward, if an investment was to be made in leisure aquatics, what we think that should look like, would be really duplicating a lot of what you already have in the harbor pool, but making it better. So a zero depth entry leisure tank, which is already provided, but doing a little bit of a better job at that, including leisure amenities and spray features, a shallow depth taught or teach pool, which again is provided in the existing facility, but doing a better job of that, as is a hot tub, and also providing some complementary dryland spaces, which you do have some of that at the existing facility, but again, upgrading. And the last point here is preferably co-locating leisure with program aquatics, just because of the scale that we're looking at with both of these amenities. There's a lot of economies of scale that exist with having co-location of having one natatorium instead of two, if you will. So the recommended program, which is, some words that hopefully will resonate with you, that you'll remember when you decide whether or not to move forward to the next step of the process, is for leisure aquatics specifically, that in order to make that investment to kind of cover those elements of leisure aquatics that we've recommended, it'd probably be an investment of $20 to $30 million in capital for about 20,000 square foot of space, and that there'd be an incremental operating cost to providing that of between $500,000 to $825,000 per year. Just as a reference, the current operational budget for the harbor pool is $1.5 million. So a couple points to make about these numbers, and if we are asked to come back and continue on with this process, these will be fine-tuned considerably. These would be class 5 estimates, so minus 30 plus 50% as per your capital project planning policy, I think is the correct term. But the whole point of doing this was to kind of take not a baby step, but an interim step between where we're at thinking about all of these 4 amenities, focusing more on a couple that we think you should be focusing on based on our research, and then making sure you have an off-ramp or a checkpoint before we come back and give you more detail than this. So that's leisure aquatics. Same idea for program aquatics. The current state is really essentially the same. There is some necessary reinvestment, and there's functional limitations on the program side as well. The recommended program would be a 25-meter 8-lane tank with some of the, regular support amenities that you'd have with that kind of tank, like a diving board, starter blocks, and so on, and complementary dryland spaces. And then again, just to reiterate, preferably co-located with leisure. So this looks very similar, only there's one word that's changed between this recommendation and the previous, and that's program aquatics instead of leisure aquatics. And I would make all the same caveats about the costing and so on. And I would reiterate here that there's almost equal importance, and probably there should be equal balance to both program and leisure aquatics should you decide to invest in upgrading your natatorium, in either creating a new facility or upgrading the existing pool. That equal focus should be put on both leisure and program. In terms of arenas, again, the service level result is maintained. So we think that based on our research, the current service level is appropriate. And I will caveat this by saying I'm related to kids that are in the hockey community in town, and I'm from Strathcona County, and I'm right in the hockey community there. So I know this isn't what most maybe hockey or ringette or ice users say, that we don't need more arenas. It's a very common thing to hear in the prairies. But based on the information that we've looked at, all of those criteria and what we've collected, we don't think it's necessary right now. But if market conditions change, if any of those inputs change, it might warrant more immediate investment. And obviously, if you continue to grow as you're expecting to grow, with some of the excitement that preceded this presentation, I guess, and other reasons, you'll have to have more of everything, including arenas, in order to meet broader populations. We also think, for what it's worth, that if the justification picture for another arena changes, and that is warranted more in an immediate term, that as of right now, it makes sense to do that at the DCC, which I think, again, probably very similar to how many of you were thinking. So the future program, again, for arenas is 3 sheets of ice, but making sure that those are relevant. So back to my comment about asset management, making sure that your existing facilities are meeting the needs of your users the best they can, that they're meeting those expectations. And that's why you've recently, well, I'm not going to say why you made the investment, but we think it was a good investment for you to decide to make in the Jubilee Recreation Center recently, to make that better at meeting kind of those modern user expectations, making them more accessible, making it more accessible. And also something that was kind of touched upon with one of the previous presentations and is in the report, but can be a tough decision when you get to that point in a project, is making sure it's as energy efficient as possible as well. That's kind of a common theme that we tried to make in our recommendations, that accessibility and energy efficiency or environmental sustainability should be top of mind. But there's prices to that you'll grapple with if you get to that point. And then the last one is fitness. So again, we think fitness is a little bit harder to determine. And if you went through the scoring and tried to figure out where we were at with coming up with these recommendations or conclusions, you probably would have run into some of the same, a little bit more nebulous kind of nature of fitness and cardio and weight training. But we do think that based on our scoring, that your existing facilities or your existing service level is appropriate. You're going to require some necessary reinvestment to equipment or to infrastructure, kind of the asset management element. There was really only one functional enhancement that we thought could be potentially looked at. But again, it is a maintain result, but that's around including more physically accessible training opportunities. And we also think that because fitness is unique in terms of its size requirement and also in terms of the convenience element of fitness and its ability to maybe grab a spectator that would normally be sitting down and make them walk on a treadmill while they're watching a sport or something like that, that as you design new facilities or reinvest in your existing facilities, that you should always have it kind of top of mind to potentially include. Not to say you need to, but if, as an example, if you were building a walking track, which is a fitness amenity, but the extra corner space in a walking track, you can think about putting fitness equipment in those extra spaces just to animate existing facilities more and kind of capitalize on opportunities as they present themselves. So not a real intense need right now, but a consideration anytime you make significant investment in a facility. And that recommendation says exactly what I just did. So in summary, we think the investment in the JRC is a good one to make sure that those assets continue to be relevant. There's some cost or impacts to that which you're already aware of and have already approved. In terms of investment in indoor program and leisure aquatics, so you can see we've combined them there just to say that we think this kind of belongs in your next major project for indoor recreation facilities. Right now, we think the estimated capital costs would be between 40 and 60 million, and the incremental new operating costs or subsidy, or I like to say investment, more so than subsidy, would be between $1 million and $1.6 million right now, and your approximate square footage would be about 40,000 square feet. And then the investment in a new arena, based on today's dollars, and all of these are based on today's dollars, would be a little bit less, so 20 to 25 million, there'd be an incremental operating impact. But ironically, like if you look at how communities are building aquatic centers, communities your size are building aquatic centers and ice arenas, they actually are about the same size in terms of the finished envelope or facility footprint. So both of them are about 40,000 square feet. So the next steps would be, should you decide to move forward with phase 3 of this project, would be for us to do concept planning. So we'd re-engage the architecture team that we have on our team to do just that, and who is responsible for already getting very familiar with or intimate with the harbor pool with their assessment, to develop some concepts, to develop some capital costing. So way more detail than that very simple number that I just gave you, and more detail related to the operational impacts that would come from better meeting the recommended leisure and program aquatics program, which I just went through with you, either at the harbor pool or at the DCC or a combination thereof. So I think if I was to step back from this and kind of try to summarize exactly what we're trying to get across here, is the path that we were on. We haven't come up with any rationale to not, based on you know, that the transparency and the different criteria that we looked at and so on, to not move forward with doing that concept planning if it's still something that council is entertaining to move forward with.
And sorry, I'll just add one final piece. So in terms of our next steps, it is that administration recommends that council approve the recommended indoor recreation facility program and direct administration to proceed to phase 3, the facility concept planning, to deliver development of options that would meet the program intent. With that, we'd be happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure there's going to be lots and lots of questions, so I will open it up to questions. So I can start if you like. So the first question that I have is when you talk about coming back with with plans. So you're talking about coming back with a concept plan for Harbor Pool and for one at the Dow Center, like 2 concept plans?
To your worship, it would actually be 3. The initial work that was approved by council called for 3 options. Expansion of the Harbor Pool, looking at potential keeping the Harbor Pool and also adding part of the program at the DCC, or completely designing a new pool at the DCC. So those would be the 3 options that 3 concepts we would bring back with related costing.
Okay, so I guess my question is, we kind of have an idea. I don't know where council's at right now, but you know, if council had an idea, well, from what we heard from the presentation number 1, the costs and shutdown of Harbor Pool, you know, like we haven't had a conversation which way we actually want to go. And I understand data's important, but I guess how much is the cost to do each one of those?
Through your worship, so the all this work is in the original scope of funding that was approved back in May. I'm not exactly sure of what this particular component of work costs, but I could get those details from.
Okay, but it is included in
It
the
is included.
existing.
There would be no additional request for funding.
Okay, and then the second question that I have, when you talk about fitness being maintained, does it take into consideration that fitness has already moved into like where the ATB Leisure Ice used to be, and I think they're up in where the little room where the youth place used to be, and so we've lost those for their programming that they were set up for?
Yes, Your Worship. It does take that into consideration, but maybe not. And this is why fitness is a little bit different than the other amenities. Maybe not to the level of detail that you've kind of asked about there. So if you look at the scoring that was done, it's really based on those 7 criteria and not necessarily things like the actual amount of square feet of a certain type of amenity or not. It's more about the function, what we know about how that compares to either what's happening in the region or other comparable municipalities, what the community told us about it, and so on. So I think the intention of the recommendation is that there is no need to go and source new space to just do fitness, but to make sure that as opportunities present themselves in other areas of existing facilities, or as you touch the envelope of new facilities, that it be considered. So it's not to shut the door necessarily on investment in fitness, but not that it's as pressing of a need or demand right now as the program in leisure aquatics.
Okay, I'll maybe circle. Those are my 2 questions for now. Councillor Kelly?
Thank you, and thank you, gentlemen. Summarize my comments. I've got 4 pages of observations on your report. As I sit here, I have no problem moving to the next stage. The concerns I have relate to the comments that you gentlemen put in your reports. And I'm just going to isolate a couple, and I'll take the rest up with administration. So if we could, page 15 of your report. It's page 69 of the council package. Help everybody get there. Give me a second as well. I want to make sure I have it. I think, yeah, there's a comment. I don't have it isolated here. Crepe, did I write down the wrong page number? It's 70, you make a comment that 75% of facility users use Harbor Pool. And I think it's on that page. And if it isn't, I simply wrote the page number down wrong. It is? Thank you, Lisa. I didn't highlight it, unfortunately. So, based on what data? Where do you come with the number that 75% of facility users use a Harbor Pool? Because your survey didn't indicate that. And if it did, I missed it.
Through your worship to Councillor Kelly, it is the survey and it was in there. So the 75%, it was in the summary page that 75% of the respondents to the survey did use the Harbor Pool.
Okay, that's different. 75% of the respondents is a definitely different statement than saying 75% of facility users. And I hate to nitpick this stuff, but the first report in March, the statistics and the comments based on the statistics were completely out of line. And in fact, the report was rewritten.
Okay, can we let Mr. Roma answer?
Certainly.
Your worship, through the councillor, actually, just to clarify Brad's answer, it was in the survey, respondents were asked whether or not they use facilities. So the ones that said they use facilities were then asked which ones. And this was the most popular at 75% of those who use facilities.
Okay,
so apologize for the lack of clarity on that.
Let's take that a step further. So if we were to extrapolate your survey results, and I looked at the survey results. In the survey results, you indicated that 6% of the households would accommodate 1.5 times the annual visits that we know Harbor Pool gets. And that if we add the next 21% to it, it's 4 times or 3.5 times the annual visits that Harbor Pool gets. Rationalize that into your findings so I can understand, please.
Your worship, through the councillor, it's kind of it's a bias that we run into with the surveys that we do. So it's I think it might be called halo bias, but Rob will definitely correct me if after the meeting if I made the wrong reference. But it has to do with people answering a survey or a question the way that they think they should, maybe because they have a membership or they think that will make them possibly healthier to say that they use, facilities more than they actually do. So I can say for certain that the discrepancies between what we hear people say through surveys or even what they say through conversations that we have when they do this kind of work doesn't match up completely with observed utilization statistics that the municipalities have or provide to us. So that's the best I can do to address that concern. Thank you.
One last follow-up question and I'll sign off, Mayor Katcher. Would it be possible that halo bias could also be affected by the type of question you ask? The extent of, for instance?
Yeah, your worship, through to the councillor, yes, it could be.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Macon.
Thanks for your presentation. My question is just around the time frame of phase 3, because same as Councillor Kelly said, I'm happy to move on with the next phase of this project, but I do have concerns with it being able to be brought back before our capital budget discussions in mid-October.
Through your worship to Councillor Macon, the plan is to have the 3 concepts and additional costing back in the fall before those conversations take place.
Okay, thank you.
That's it.
Your worship? Oh, sorry. Maybe I'll just add to what Brad said. Those of you that are familiar with kind of design terminology, these are very much still going to be concept plans. So if you think about the full design process as say 100% of effort. Concept planning is the first, which is usually about 10 to 15% of that effort. So it won't be exactly, if you decide to move forward after the next presentation, it's going to look somewhat differently for sure, if not dramatically differently than what we'll show you at the next meeting, but it'll be enough detail so that you can see in general what it's going to take for footprint, what it's going to take for the different types of amenities and support amenities to meet that program that's recommended. And enough detail for us to do a better job of the capital and operational costing estimation for you as well.
Okay, Councillor Harris.
So, gentlemen, so in your review of arenas and fitness facilities, is it safe to assume, based on your experience, that we've more than adequately created an investment to provide services that people are using? I mean, I look at the Dow and I use the Dow every day, and I don't see the need to expand it. We can make it better, and I think that's ultimately what you were getting at. Is that correct?
Your worship, through the councillor, I think that's a fair way to say it, with a couple caveats. One is that doesn't mean that if you talk to users of those spaces that they're going to say that same thing. I would say this is more an objective look at all of those criteria, not just, coming from a biased or user perspective, but looking at all of those criteria. We think that you have the right quantity of those amenities with some potential quality enhancements that would be meeting those modern user expectations. So yeah, I think you captured that well.
Yeah, and I can't comment on arenas because I am not a hockey guy. I have no interest in it, but I know people in the community do. And so those people will tell you various things, correct? Right. So, but from a fitness standpoint, I think you nailed it. And I know that users will say, yeah, we want a little bit more space, or we want it programmed a little bit different. And that will always be there, but we can do that within the context of our normal operating budget, right?
Through your worship to Councillor Harris, yes, we do have some flexibility. And I think just to tie briefly back to the mayor's question about the spaces, we do have the ability to run some of our fitness programs outside of those two fitness spaces. We utilize the gymnasium, sometimes the soccer field as well to run programs as well. So we do have some flexibility and room to accommodate changes within our existing program and budget.
So if we park, and this is where my last question, where I'm going. So if we park the fitness and the arena stuff, then ultimately it comes down, what do we do with a future facility at the DCC, and what do we do with Harbor Pool? That's the essence of what you're going to do in phase 3. And we will have a number of opportunities to look at alternatives that we then, as a group of decision makers, can make financial decisions on going forward.
Through your worship to Councillor Harris, yes, that is correct.
Okay, I just want to make sure, because ultimately there's a lot of information in your report, and I want to go down the right channel. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Abatoye.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your presentation. So just two quick, simple questions. Harbor Pool operating cost for both leisure and program aquatics, is it 3 million or 1.5 million?
Your worship, through the councillor, it would be 3 in total, because if you were to move forward with what we've recommended at this highest level. So right now it's 1.5 that's being invested. And we think that because you'll be, if you decide to move forward the way we've recommended, you'll be increasing the footprint and the scale of what you have at the Harbor Pool right now, and that the net expense to the city will also be increased. But when we come back in front of you, if we move on to the next phase, we'll actually be providing much more detail on the operational side of things, which will include obviously the revenues that we'd expect you'd receive, but also the scaled up expenses such as lifeguarding, utility costs, supply costs, whatever goes into operating your existing pool.
So your estimated operating costs is actually increasing, because I feel like the way the report was written is like with the new recommended program, it's going to be 500 to 825,000, while currently our operating cost is 1.5 million. It kind of sounds like it's going to be cheaper.
Through your worship, the Council Abatoye, yeah, the the wording that we used there was incremental cost. So that was intended to indicate that would be above what we are currently expending on those programs.
Right. Okay.
And those were net operating costs. So assuming the 1.5 million for Harbor Pool accounts for revenue we get. It's not just all expense. It's the net expense after revenues are accounted for.
All right. Thanks for the clarification. And just my second quick question. So with the concept design, are we going to be getting class 3 or more estimate?
Your worship, through the counselor, that's a great question. I think that we committed to class 4, but it at least will be a better quality class 5 estimate if we aren't providing the class 4. We don't have right now, when it comes to cost estimation, the next step for you would be, or for a project would be to hire a quantity survey or a cost consultant to do the costing based on a square footage. So right now we don't have a specific square footage, and the architecture team is going to do a costing based on whatever square footage they come up with the concept planning. But as of right now, we don't have the next step, which would be that cost consultant. Just based on my experience, though, the difference between at this stage, the difference between what an architect would say and what a cost consultant would say at that concept planning stage is pretty much identical, because really they just look at what's happened recently in the marketplace and they apply those costs per square footage or actuals to whatever the concept plan suggests the square footage is.
Yeah, no, I'm just more interested in knowing how close we are to the actual cost, because right now it's still all estimates until we know, right? All right.
So maybe I'll just make one more comment, Your Worship, on that. I wish that we could I got that on. I wish that we could sit here and give you more accuracy, more confirmation on capital costs. But right now, it's actually, it's never fully known until the project is actually tendered. And we have projects right now that even at the tender stage, even after they have a cost consultant, they've got engineers, they've got 80% design drawings, that costing comes back significantly different than what was expected, and it's in a couple projects it's shelved the projects, in others they've still moved forward and so on. But I don't want you to think that at any point that you see my face, because my face is only involved in the upfront stages of a project typically, that you can expect to get any more than maybe a class 4, probably a class 5 cost estimate. And I apologize for that, but that's just kind of how it is, especially right now.
Councillor Nguyen.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to refer to a comment that's made under the comparators. I do appreciate all the comparisons that we've made with communities who have built infrastructure that we're looking at potentially in the future here. I found that very interesting in this report and applicable. It's just a comment that open swim is generally available all day in most communities. Has Harbor Pool ever been open in its history to, for the entire duration of a day for consistent programming? Or I guess for the public?
Through your worship, the council and Ryan, I will ask one of our more experienced people who've been in the city longer to respond to that. Has the Harbor Pool ever been open for
public
leisure?
use all day? Yeah.
No. I think, sorry, that's the short answer. But I think what this speaks to a little bit is what Mike spoke to earlier on about the aquatics and leisure and program elements of the pool. The way Harbor Pool is built is it's interconnected. So other natatoriums may have 2 separate tanks. So you can actually have your swim lessons going on one and having leisure activities full time at another tank, where we, with the shared tank, kind of have to navigate or blend those 2 things. So you can't necessarily have it available for leisure all the time, because one of our key things that has been happening lately has been a greater and greater focus on providing programs, particularly swim lessons, to help address our backlog. And so the emphasis has been programming first, leisure second from that perspective, just to try and address that core service in the community.
All right. So as it sits right now, it's an impossibility. Sorry, I'll let you.
Yeah. Well,
I didn't know that.
Mr. Roma, did you want to?
No, I'll let you finish, but I just have something else to say on that. Sorry.
Okay,
Your Worship.
I would just like to respond to that. So right now it's an impossibility to run that based on the design of the pool as it sits. So my follow up question then would be with all three design concepts that we're going to be looking at, do all those encompass an open all day? They do. I'm seeing a nod, so that's okay. Thanks.
Yeah, Your Worship, through the counselor. If I was able to put one more, and nobody said I couldn't, we thought the time was right on this. But if we were to put one more slide in the presentation, it would have been specifically about aquatics and our approach to supply and demand. I don't know if you were able to read that at the end of the document or not, but there's 7 different types of activities that you would want to see in a publicly funded pool. And of those 7 activities, you also want to have as many of them happening at any given time as you possibly can, because that meets the most community need. And it also makes if you were to think about, one way I like to think about pools is kind of the effectiveness of pools and maybe the amount of people per hour they can accommodate, the activity hours that they can accommodate in a day, that kind of thing. And if you can have more than one of those 7 different activity types happening in an natatorium, then you can definitely get more swim visits and more effectiveness out of your natatorium. And one of the significant limitations to the harbor pool right now, aside from deck height and that kind of thing, is it doesn't allow for that multi-use or that multiple functionality, multiple concurrent functionality that some of the best and most utilized pools that we've seen or planned have or do. So if Harbor Pool was configured in a way that allowed multiple use to happen, it would probably see, and this is just me speaking now, but it would probably see a significantly larger number of swim visits annually than it does right now, just because you could have more than one thing or more than 2 things or 3 things. You can get more out of the investment you're currently making in Harbor Pool.
Of course, thanks. Can I ask a second question, or do you want to go another round? So my question, and it kind of relates to your last statement, in your experience and your expertise, have you seen a scenario recently where there's been a pool moved to a multi-use complex, and then we've been able to observe the uptake and usership of that complex? I'm just kind of preparing a mentality of keeping the geographical location of our current pool to a possible benefit of adding it to a multi-use facility.
That's a really good question, Your Worship, through to the counselor. So one example would be Service Place in St. Albert, only they kept their other pool open because they were at a different stage of size than you are right now. I know of another community that's contemplating adding an aquatic center to their existing multiplex, and it has kind of the same pre-planning that happened in this case, but it hasn't actually occurred yet. And I can think of a lot right now that have pools that will at least be explored to attach them to their multiplex facilities, but I can't think of any that just took a pool and added it to something similar to what you have at the DCC. But one comment I think I'd make is I'm not sure that you'll get more aquatics utilization because it's at the DCC necessarily, but there'll be more economies of scale for sure in operational costs, which you'll see reflected in our estimates when we bring that forward, just because you don't have to duplicate as many resources as you would at a standalone facility. And that is heightened if all of the aquatics is consolidated at a single location. If you split aquatics up at the size and scale that you have right now, which we will measure and show you the impacts of, it will cost more to do that because you're duplicating some of that expertise that's needed to run pools and expertise that's needed to ingest and spit out people and so on.
Okay, so we're on to round 2. I'm top of the speaking order. Just one quick, easy question. What are the 7 activities? I know swimming and swimming lessons and lane swim. It's all swimming to me, but what are the 7 activities?
Your Worship, it's a great question. So there is leisure aquatics like recreational swimming, there is sport, there is special events, there is therapy and rehab, there is leadership training, and there is fitness. So they're all swimming. They're all people getting wet, putting on a swim, well, except for leadership training, which is still a very important, well, I guess they're putting on bathing suits too, but that's training lifeguards and kind of feeding the lifeguard and the kind of safety element of a pool. But they're all swimming. They're just different kinds of swimming and different kinds of events. And when I talked about, it's interesting that leisure scored the same as program. Leisure aquatics is much more for your residents or for more everyday users, or maybe not much more, but that's who it accommodates. People probably aren't going to drive from 3 hours away to visit your leisure pool, but they might drive from 3 hours away to use your program tank because you have an event that's being hosted. There would be more economic impact attached to it, and so on. So your appeal of leisure aquatics is broader to your local community in terms of users, the spontaneous nature, the availability, as the councillor said, of it being there all the time for somebody to participate in. Whereas the program scored the same, but it did it in a different way on the backs of things like I said, economic impact in event hosting and that kind of thing.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. I was just curious. Councillor Kelly, you're next.
Thank you. Budgeting. When you budget the costs of the facility, you didn't put in here, at least I don't believe you put in here, the debt servicing cost. When I asked the question last fall during capital budget session, council was provided with a budget for the new pool. The numbers are very close to the numbers you give, except that the debenture cost is greater than the sum of the $3 million to have the pool. So if we don't talk, I'm pleased you're going to bring back the numbers. I really am. Let's get the total cash flow picture into this because it all comes from taxpayers' dollars. Let's not ignore half of it or more than half of it. I'm going to vote to move on, but I just want to ask one more question in your report, and it's probably fairly nebulous. It's on page 116 of the council package, and Mayor Catcher, it's on page 116 where they list the 7 activities. By the way, it's in a red box. Page 62 of the report itself, 116 of the council package. And it's the paragraph to the right on the white page, not the highlighted box, where you reference specialized amenities or features such as water slides, lazy rivers, wave pools, aquatic play features. And I think what I heard you say is you're not thinking about any of that for Fort Saskatchewan, but you make the comment, while capital costs of these amenities can be significant, enhanced attractiveness for users often outsets these costs over time. It's kind of like telling me that I should never ever look at the Chev. I should jump right to the Cadillac because at the end of the day, I'm going to be happy I did. Is that what you're saying here?
Your Worship, through the councillor, hearing you say that makes me want to remove that sentence because that's not our job to maybe suggest that it outweighs the cost. That's really council's job to suggest. So it's not meant to mislead you in that regard. But I would say that when we're hired to do this kind of work, and we represent, one of probably 5 companies across Canada that this is all we do, is this kind of planning work for parks and recreation. Unless we're told that it's about reduction of a service or it's about saying no to some kind of a project that's maybe thought about, we have a bias to actually present a case for it. We do. We present information that you will look at and come up with your own conclusion about. But if you leave it to us to discuss that, we try our best to not be, but I would say we are a little bit biased because we believe in the value that these kind of amenities have in communities. But our, even though we have a recommendation in the report, our goal with this whole process is to show you how we arrived at that recommendation and give you the tool, which is really the criteria, the 7 or the 6 and the 10 criteria that we use to assess the service level and to prioritize, to show you how we did it, to show you that we think these are the most important considerations that should come into play, not just who in the community is yelling the loudest, or not just economic development, or not just, whatever, a survey result, but that it's a multifaceted kind of a multi-input decision that has to be made, and that you can see a pathway where you can interpret your own kind of recommendation if you had to, if you didn't think that what we came up with was appropriate. But what I can say is there isn't a lot of people that out there that could be sitting in front of you right now that live and breathe this kind of subject matter. And that's part of the value that we bring to these kinds of projects.
Thank you. You confirmed what I had already concluded, and I thank you for your honesty. This report, the one in March, was riddled with bias. And as a counselor, I wonder why, this is a question for administration. Why would we hire a consultant to present to council that brings a biased approach back? We weren't told to expect that before this dance started.
Mr. Fleming.
Yeah, through your worship, I don't think that was our intent. I mean, ultimately, this is work that is fairly specialized to a certain subject matter area. And the intent was to go out and find somebody who has expertise in this to provide council with information back with which to make a decision. So certainly wasn't our intent to introduce bias, I would say.
Mr. Yes. Roma, yes.
Sorry, Your Worship. Just one thing to add to that. The engagement work that we did, I wouldn't say that's more factual representation, and all of the inputs that are presented in the report are facts, but there is the kind of some subjectivity that goes into doing the scoring, which you'd see. And like I said, we think that at least we've provided the structure for you to see how that recommendation is made, how those conclusions were made, and again, provide a tool that you could in fact use and kind of come up with your own recommendation or conclusion.
Okay.
I want to answer that, Mayor Catcher, please. Thank you. And again, the data that you presented from the survey may or may not have been biased. That's not my concern. The interpretation of that data in the original report certainly was. That is my concern. And that is the job of your company. So I'm going to leave it at that. Just one comment. I would expect and hope from administration at the next stage of this, we're going to advise our consultants that we would prefer no bias in the report.
Okay, and that could come in during discussion and debate when we're debating something. Councillor Harris.
Mr. Roma, if we were to do an assessment of Harbor Pool to look at a major reconstruction in some way, in other words, such as tearing off the existing pool component, recognizing we just put $1.5 million into change rooms and those other areas, front end areas, front office. We have to address code infractions. Building codes have changed, electrical codes have changed, and those all have to be addressed if you do a major capital expansion, right, or upgrade.
Yeah, there's a set, sorry, Your Worship, through the councillor, there's a set of those things that we know would have to happen, and then depending on what the repurpose or the use of it would be afterwards, there's another set of things that the architects identified that may have to be done as well. And just as order of magnitude, the cost for the necessary things and the maybe things were about the same.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand. So if we were to, as one option, tear off the pool, leave the front end there, tear off and put a whole new pool natatorium in there, is that where the majority of the building code deficiencies exist today? Is in the current natatorium and the supply and the mechanical and electrical And in other words, so if you totally replaced it with brand new, you're going to build brand new, not fix old. Is that a fair assessment in terms of your type of analysis on rehabilitating a facility like the Harbor Pool as opposed to building new?
Your worship, through the councillor. So I'm not the right person on the team to answer this definitively. But I think the answer to that would be yes, because you're replacing everything. I think I've been down this road recently for pools that are actually around the same age, maybe a bit older than the Harbor Pool. And when a cost estimation is done between building a brand new one from scratch on a new site or renovating existing with all of the kind of contingencies that would be the engineer would put in place, not knowing, what's inside the wall and so on, that the costs have actually turned out to be about the same, if not in a couple instances, the renovation or the additional cost of renovating existing facility actually outweighs building a brand new one from scratch in one instance I can think about right now. But those are the kind of questions that we would answer coming back to you in the next couple of months to help with that.
So that being said, then ultimately that's the level of analysis you will provide to us relative to the future of Harbor Pool. I get the whole idea of coming up with a concept plan for a new leisure facility at the DCC, but in terms of repurposing an existing asset, which we just sunk $1.5 million into change rooms, I want to look at a wise investment of capital expenditure going forward. So that's within the frame of reference in phase 3, correct?
Your worship, through the councillor, yes. And we would actually also, without getting into too much detail, part of what we will charge the architecture team with is looking at what kind of repurposing options could be there if it wasn't wet, if it wasn't a natatorium any longer. And there are some precedents out there where communities have done that, but it's really about the knowledge they have of the building based on the engineering assessments and everything else that they've conducted, and whether or not that recent investment you've made, how that could be best leveraged if it wasn't a pool anymore.
Yeah, that's important. So if that level of peeling back the layers of the onion gets us down to the core of the estimate, then I support moving to phase 3 because we need additional data on which to make prudent decisions. So thank you.
Councillor Noyan, questions?
Yeah, my question has to do with the next phase and the 3 potential designs that we're going to see. Has a 50-meter pool been considered, or will that option be presented in one of these designs? And the reason I ask is because there are very few in our region, and that could potentially give us more sport tourism in Fort Saskatchewan and open us up to competitions if we're doing design work at this phase. And I guess subsequent to that question, then would it be possible to look at that for design work?
Your worship, through the councillor, very common question that we get when we're planning pools. We were clear in our recommendation that a 25-meter 8-lane is what we think you need in order to kind of continue to meet the current and future needs of the community within the scope of this investment. So what we were planning to do with the next steps would not be to actually show what a 50-meter option would look like, because we haven't, based on the research we conducted, what we heard from the community and so on, we haven't heard, an overwhelming rationale for doing that. But it could be done, and obviously we're going to make notes about it right now because you've brought it up. So it could be done at the concept planning stage, or it could even be done at the next kind of stage of design should you decide to move forward after the next one. That question of 50 versus 25 is sometimes dealt with after project approval too. So we're obviously, it's going to be on the radar now to do that. It'll probably be order of magnitude incremental cost to move to a 50 versus that 25-meter 8-lane that we can provide when we're in front of you next time. But it wasn't on the radar actually until you just brought it up there, Councillor. Even though it is a very common question, to be honest, it's a tough question for us to answer, and it's an expensive question to answer on, or it's an expensive addition to a project in terms of both capital and operating moving forward, and mainly because it doesn't help with that multi-use as much as some other elements of the natatorium do. But it is on our radar now, so we will talk about it.
Yeah, and I appreciate the clarity of your answer and the scope of your answer as well. And my rationale is that why not build something that's very unique if we're going to be looking at different options at this point. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Blizzard.
You can do Brian first. I don't care.
We're on round 2 still.
Alrighty. Okay. Just going back with your the bias. So if you looked at all the facilities here, right? Or does your company deal more with pools?
Your worship, through the councillor, we deal with everything parks and recreation.
So while I did reading this find the same type of bias when I was reading the pool side, if you had found that an arena was lacking, would we have found the same type of thing focusing on an arena? Like, do you find what is needed in a community that you would recommend, and then naturally just kind of lean towards that?
Your worship, through the councillor, it's still fact driven. Everything that we're doing is data driven, fact driven, and if I could hit rewind, I might not have said the exact same thing that I previously said, but inherently being in this line of work and doing all of the stuff that we do to make us experts in it, we do always document the value that any kind of parks and recreation amenity has in a community. So that automatically kind of makes you probably more apt to say, yeah, you should have more arenas. Yeah, you should have more fitness. And we don't always say that. Like in this case, we didn't say that, despite it would have probably been an easy conclusion to reach in a community like Fort Saskatchewan, who's had the same amount of ice here for quite some time now. It would have been an easy conclusion to reach that, yeah, you should build another ice arena too. But there were reasons based on data and fact that we said that isn't the case. Just like there were reasons based on data and fact that we said, or we recommend, that you do improve the quantity and quality of your aquatics in the community.
Yeah, and I think you're right with a bias. I think that's the wrong word. I think it focused heavily on the pool, but that's because that's what it looks like we need.
Through your worship to Councillor Blizzard, I'd just like to add two things. One of the things, again, whether we call it bias or whatever else, I think it's where with working with RC, I think we see it more, I would say, in writing than in analysis. And I think to Mike's point is they're used to writing about, where there's a need and why there's value to recreation, which is widely recognized, and they reference pan-Canadian policies and reports that speak to all the benefits. So there's nothing untoward, or they're not speaking out of line with what essentially the sector says. The other piece I was just going to say is the other thing in terms of their findings is when you look at the scoring that they did, and this is where we really focused a lot of our review in terms of trying to make sure that as administration, it made sense in terms of how they got to the scores they had. Did it reflect the conversations and the information we had, some of which we provided, but also just from hearing from stakeholders, was that these things that have been identified, particularly in the pool and other things, are from our master recreation facilities surveys going back to 2008. So again, there is nothing out of line with their findings that hasn't already been reported in the community several times over the past decade. So I don't think there's anything new or dramatically out of line with the results we've seen previously. So I just wanted to qualify that.
Okay, thank you. Round 3, Councillor Kelly.
I wasn't going to come back to this subject until the conversation had just ended. The concept of bias in any report or any study or any research is huge and not to be misled or diminished in any way, shape, or form. The method of gathering the data introduced bias into the data. That's a given. I would have hoped the analysis would try to remove.
Is there a question?
Yeah, there is. Can I expect going forward to be faced and have with constant bias from the reports and based on everybody's comments here that we're just going to accept that as being a reasonable day-to-day way we do business? Because it's not all right with me.
Through your worship to Councillor Kelly, I myself, as well as the conversations I'll have with our staff and obviously everyone else involved in the review, will make a very consecrated effort to ensure that we're not seeing bias from both a language perspective and, for sure, as I said, as we review these, from an analysis perspective.
Okay, then I have one more question, if I may. And I'll come back to the bias once we get debating the motion. Page 128 of the report, or council package 74 of the report, there's an interesting reference regarding asset management and the need for constant reinvestment. And I appreciate that comment, by the way, of 1.7 to 2.5% of the facility's value. So an annual reinvestment of, let's round it to 2%. I think that's probably consistent with what we experienced with Harbor Pool over the last 40 years as well. So it would be nice if when we do our budget for the next stage of this, that we also factor that into the budget so that we get a true picture of what it is we're looking at. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That appears to be all of the questions. So what is the wish of council? Oh, Councillor Macon.
I'll make the motion that council approve the recommended indoor recreation facility program and directs administration to proceed to phase 3, facility concept planning to deliver options that meet the program intent.
Okay, thank you very much. Would you like to speak to the motion?
I can. I think that this council committed to going through this entire process to ensure that we're making the right decisions. And I do believe that regardless of what it is, this council will be well, in my opinion, investing in our aquatics facility. So I think that coming back with all of these options is really important for us to make the right choice moving forward. So I'm looking forward to that coming back prior to capital budget. And thank you so much for your presentation today. It was great.
Okay, thank you very much. The motion has been accepted. It's been spoken in favor. It's open for discussion and debate. Councillor Harris, you're first.
I'll support the motion because I really think, as Councillor Macon has indicated, we committed to following a process. I think hopefully as objective as we possibly can make it, notwithstanding potential bias. I think we are the individuals who end up being the filters for bias. And I think as long as we are able to get data that we can draw out in a conversation when we make a future decision as to what we're going to do, we can challenge any of that fact situation that exists. But I think going forward, we need to look at the options, and we've committed to doing that. So I'm prepared to wait until we see what comes out of this to be able to have that fruitful discussion going forward. I've said going forward, I didn't think that we can afford to build a $60 million plus facility at this point in time. And my preference is to see a reinvestment in Harbor Pool, because eventually when we reach 47,000 population in 17 years, we'll probably need 2 facilities. So at some point in the future, we'll probably need a new leisure center, and we'll probably need the type of facility we currently have, which is a quote-unquote pool. So to make that decision going forward, I'm going to need to see the data as to what ultimately we can get out of a reinvestment in Harbor Pool. So that's crucial to me. The expenditure for a huge facility like they have at Millennium Place or have in St. Albert or have anywhere else is a huge investment, and ultimately we need to have a population base that can afford to pay for it. And I don't think we're there yet. Maybe we will be in the future. So that's where I'm coming from.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kelly on debate.
Thank you. And yes, Councillor Harris, I agree. We're part of our job here is to try to filter the bias. I would propose also, though, that that's part of administration's job and part of our consultant's job. Bias is insidious. It creeps its way in. Everybody's job is to try to filter it out. I shouldn't have to sit up here and feel like a cop. I'm going to support the motion. It was clear to me from the outset of this dance, approximately or almost a year ago now, that we needed to get all the way through so that we could try to make a decision, and we need all of the pieces. I'm going to stress, if it hasn't been obvious, and I'm sure it has been, that I have found this very frustrating. And it started with receipt of the first report in March. It was so riddled with incorrect analysis that I wanted to rip it up. It was eventually rewritten, but it's useless. We come to this stage where there was a lot more meat, and I appreciate it, I really do, but the damage is already done in my mind. I honestly believe everybody should try to remove biases as much as bias within any system as much as possible. It's critical. It really is. I really appreciate your candor. Maybe you regret using the word. I appreciate it because it's there. The medical industry, statisticians take great pains to remove bias from their analysis. Great pains. They go through peer reviews. Administration, you're our peer review for this stuff. You really are. That's your job. They do the report, you peer review it, then you bring it to council. And I was really disappointed the first go around that it went through peer review and the errors that were in there, glaring errors, still existed. It showed to me a bias within administration that I didn't want to see. You owe it to the taxpayer just like we owe it to the taxpayer to do the right thing. Not the thing you want, the right thing. And I'll leave it at that. I think I've made my point very clear. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm next in the speaking order. So thank you very much for all the information. I think it's great. I know I've lived here since 1990, and I think from the time that we moved here, it was almost, we had the outdoor pool, and then we didn't have the outdoor pool, and then we said, well, we're going to build a spray park, and we're going to have the harbor pool, but there's always been everybody speaking off, we need a bigger pool, we need a pool, we need something more. And it depends what stage your family's going through as well. And I say that because when we have an average age of 35 in this community, there's a lot of children in this community, and there's a lot of people who want to take their kids swimming. The schools want to get the kids into swimming lessons for those that can't. I know a lot of seniors who go and they love their lane swim, and they're really offended when they can't get in to get their lane swim in there. So, when we talk about what people want, and you can use whatever word you want. I don't care. When I follow Fort Sask Misinformed, respectful, informed, and this one and that one, you go on there, and it is just constantly littered with people talking about a new pool. And no, they don't talk about the costs, and that's one thing that we always talk about, but I think we're going through the proper methodology. So I don't know how you could come back here with anything but what you came in, because you go out and you ask the public what they want or what they're using. If they don't answer, well, you can't force them to give you an answer. I mean, it's no different than our census, where we had to go out and chase people, and even with that, 74 plus households would not respond. So I think with the information from the survey, you are working exactly with what you've got. So I just say, good job. And to those who want to respond and get involved, I think that's what it's all about. Having their say in our community. If you don't want to have your say, you get left with whatever you get left with. So I'm going to say I think you did a great job. I'm looking forward to the next phase. And the only question that I do have, is there a firm commitment Because we're talking about capital budget in October. Will this be by the end of September? Well, Councillor Macon asked a question. You said the fall, and she asked about capital budget. So I'm asking for when the firm commitment is.
Through or to your worship, that's why I responded to the fall to just confirm if it would be in early October or the end of September. Mike has given me the thumbs up, so I think we'll have conversations with Troy in scheduling, but that will be our target date.
Okay, and I'll support this motion. I just want to make sure that we have a firm commitment that's going to be back to us before we're actually getting in and discussing and debating. Okay, thank you. Councillor Abatoye on the motion.
My question has been answered. I was going to ask if this is definitely going to come before capital budget, so that's good to hear. But I do support the motion, and I think that so far we've gone with the motion and had very important conversations, because this is really significant capital investment that's going to be made by this community, and it's important for us to have all the options on the table. And I think that's what we've done so far. And I just want to say thank you to everyone that's working on this. I think it's been good so far, but I look forward to the final outcome, which obviously we don't know what way we're going to sway yet. But just having all those options, I appreciate having all of those options on the table. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Nguyen.
I think there's been some good conversation today. We've been making some good inroads. I'm going to support this motion, absolutely. And I really look forward to seeing what we're going to come back with in the fall, so that we can have some more firm numbers and what they look like materiality wise into what we could get for those numbers, instead of us guessing at things. And eventually this council, we're going to have to make the best decisions that we can with our heads and our hearts. And in a lot of ways, rec facilities, they're different for every one of us here. We use them differently. We've had different experiences. They've been a different part of our lives, and I think they have for every citizen in Fort Saskatchewan. So I thank you for the work that you're doing. It's very comprehensive. I'm going to go back and review this a few times to get myself embedded in what we're doing here further, and I look forward to seeing you again in the fall.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Macon on close.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like we have support for the project, and I just want to say that I think the community has been waiting for us to make a decision on this for a long time, and I am definitely looking forward to this coming back in September, so thank you.
All right, thank you very much. The motion is now closed. Please cast your vote. And that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. All right, so are there, we covered 8.1 as consent. Are there any new notice of motions? Not seeing or hearing any. Are there any points of interest? No. Are there any councillor inquiries to administration? I had one, but I forgot what it was. So with that, we apparently don't need a confidential closed session. So with that, I'm going to say it's 4:59. Before I adjourn, I just wish everybody a wonderful summer break. I know some people will still be doing meetings. There's always still meetings going on, but take whatever time you get to get some rest and relaxation. And we'll see you back here in these chairs on August 22nd, I think it is. So with that, the time is 5 p.m. We do stand adjourned. Thank you.